This is the Eternal Lights podcast, where true Alaskans share how they have seen the eternal light of Christ in their lives.
Hello, I am Sister Powell, and welcome to the Eternal Lights podcast. Today we have our guest, Allan Curtis. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. We just wanted to start by asking, where are you from?
Well, which time? I've been a lot of places. Before my mission here in Alaska, we came up from Washington State, but I have spent 30 years plus in Alaska, mostly in Fairbanks and Salcha.
Okay, so what did you do up in Fairbanks and Salcha?
Taught school in the Fairbanks School District.
Very cool. What was your favorite thing to teach?
I was a special ed teacher most of the time. I started out in second grade, but I've taught all the way from preschool through 12th.
Wow. What was an important thing that you learned while teaching?
Have a lot of patience.
I'm sure. So was it younger kids then that you were mainly working with?
Mainly, yeah, up to 5th grade, 6th grade.
Okay. So what did you learn from those kids? I'm sure you learned a lot, but what's one thing that you learned?
Well, besides patience, to be flexible, I guess. I've learned different ways to present lessons so that more people would understand what they needed to learn.
Yeah. So besides teaching, what are some of the other things that you've done?
Oh, goodness. Quite a lot. I spent 3 years in the Marine Corps way back when, before I came to Alaska. While in Alaska and going to the University in Fairbanks, I worked for Fish and Game in the summers. A couple years on the Copper River near Chitna on fish wheels. A year out on the Copper River in Iliamna, fly fishing for rainbow trout. I spent a year in Fairbanks doing surveys of ponds and streams. Yeah.
Wow. So when you were fishing, who was your favorite person to go fishing with?
Well, actually, I had my companion on the Copper River, my second year there, was a defenseman who I played hockey with.
Wow.
I was goalie. He was one of the defensemen for the University of Alaska.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
So we had a good time together.
Good. Well, tell us a little bit about your family.
Let's see. Prior to my marriage to Sister Curtis, I was married in 1977. We had 5 kids and raised them, and she died of cancer in 2010.
Okay. So what was an important lesson that you learned from having children and
Patience. I learned a lot of patience. Let's see. Yeah, just and flexibility. You need to be flexible.
So it sounds like you've been through some trials in your life. What got you through those trials?
Well, my faith in Jesus Christ and coming to know the gospel, and that happened in my late 20s.
Okay. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. I can take it back a long ways, but the incident that really got me thinking was when I was out on the Copper River in Lake Iliamna. And I was taking pictures of the grizzlies as they fed on salmon out in the river. And I was fairly comfortable, been around bears a lot fishing the river, and I was sitting on the riverbank, camera around my neck, my rifle was over here on my right, my dog was over here on my left, and I thought I was safe. You know, the wind was blowing downstream, and if a bear was coming, a bear was coming from upstream, my dog would smell it, and he would react. He was a border collie and pretty good about that. I figured that if a bear was coming from downstream towards me, then they would smell us and avoid us. Well, I was wrong. A sow and 2 cubs came up from downstream, and I didn't see them until I heard a twig snap, and I stood up. And about 30 foot away, a bear stood up. And I had my rifle, and everything was fine. At that point, I yelled at the bear, and as soon as I yelled, another bear stood up. And I thought, oh, I'm in trouble. These are cubs. Where's Mom? And at that moment, in the grass in front of me, I heard a moo. And she poked her head out of the grass, which was about 4 feet tall. So it was about yay tall. And I started to swing my rifle down, but I realized that she was so close that I would hit her in the head. And so I stepped back with my left foot to get a little bit of distance. And as I did, my left foot went over the bank. And I pulled off a shot, and as I was falling over backwards into the river, only thing I could think of was keep your rifle dry. You may need it. And so I went in, hit the bottom, bounced back up, ready. The bear was gone, my dog was gone, and I started backing out into the river. And that's when I started to shake. And I yelled for my dog. He came back, finally. And we got in the boat and went back to the cabin and to dry out. And then I decided I'd had enough of the river for the day. And I went down to a little place called Popinvanoy Landing where mail came in. And it happened to be mail day, and the plane came in. And so I was going to see if I had any mail. And the oldest of 6 kids met me as I parked there. And I didn't know it at the time, but the November before, her and her brothers were baptized into the church in Palmer. And they attended school in Palmer, and they spent the summers out on Lake Iliamna with their family. And she asked me how my day was. And I said, you really want to know? And she said, yeah. And so I told her what had happened. And she started turning pale. And for a native girl to turn pale, it's a little hard. But she did. And I said, what's wrong, Dolores? What's wrong? And she said, I had a dream last night that you were mauled by a bear. And I said, really? And she said, yes. And I got up this morning and I prayed that you'd be safe. And for the first time in my life, I came to the conclusion that maybe prayer had something to do with my life and what happens. And that prayers do get answered. Because I could see that I could have easily been mauled, by a sow and 2 cubs. Yeah, that wouldn't take much imagination. Anyway, that started me thinking. And later on, she gave me A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, and I read it. And I had some questions that were answered by some of the members in the Palmer ward at that time. But it took me about 9 months before I decided to pray about the church to see if it was true. And once I did that, I got an answer, and I decided that I better join the church. And so I did. And that's the beginning of my conversion story. It's been going on for the last 50 years.
Of course. Wow, that's a pretty incredible conversion story. How have you seen prayer bless your life since?
Oh, goodness. In so many ways, with trouble that children were having, the trials that my wife went through with her cancer, picking a new companion, just all kinds of things. Lots of choices that I made had to do with prayer and answers to prayers.
What is some advice that you would give to someone who's striving to recognize for an answer to their prayer?
If you have a feeling that you're not sure what it is, it's a spirit. I had prayed the first time to know if the church was true, and I had this feeling in my chest, and I thought, I made myself do that, And so I prayed again the next night, and I was sure that I was going to be able to keep that from happening, and I wasn't, and it did, and I realized where it came from. And impressions that come out of nowhere, that's the spirit.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a pretty incredible life, and now that the gospel's in your life, you seem to feel joy and see that joy. So what are some of the other joys that you've been able to recognize since the gospel was introduced?
Oh, goodness. Being able to serve people unselfishly, without any other thought than helping them out. I got into family history. I love doing that, tracing back my ancestors. My name really isn't Curtis, by the way. I found that out just about 4 years ago through DNA and connecting with part of a line that I was almost sure I was connected to, but I didn't know how. And I found out that my grandfather ran away from home when he was about 12. So this would have been about 1902, somewhere around there. And he changed his name because that's the last time that I found, well, not quite, but really the last time I found a John Andrew Keyes was in the 1910 census. And at that time, he was with an uncle and an aunt in Colorado. And they apparently didn't know that he had changed his name. But like 7 years later, his name shows up as Curtis on the draft records. His name shows up as Curtis in 1920 in the census and on his marriage license. And so John Andrew Keyes disappeared in the early 1900s and reappeared about 15 years later.
Wow.
As Jack Curtis. And so, yeah, I'm anxious to get to the other side of the veil and talk to him about this and get the full story.
Wow. I feel curious too now. Well, that's really cool. Family history is so important. What blessings have you seen come to your family as you've taught the gospel?
Well, conversion of individuals. Some of my family have not joined the church. I've got a sister and her kids that are not interested. My kids are mostly interested and active and doing what they should. A lot of them have helped me teach others at various times, particularly in Salcha and around.
So most of your kids have remained active in the gospel. What advice would you give to someone who's striving to do the same for their kids?
Just be honest and straightforward and tell them how you feel and tell them what you feel.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you. Well, we're grateful to have had you here at this time, and we appreciate all that you're doing for the church. You're serving a mission, is that correct?
Yes, I'm the financial secretary for the mission and housing coordinator. I'm losing that job here because there's a replacement for that. I will continue on for another month or so as financial secretary.
Well, we appreciate your service and all that you do for the Lord and for all of us. And we are so grateful that you were here today. And we're unfortunately running out of time. But is there any last pieces of advice that you'd give to those who are watching?
Yeah, stay warm. Winter's coming.
Thank you.
You bet.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're so grateful for the opportunity to be here in Alaska and to experience the joy that comes from the gospel. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Eternal Lights podcast. We hope you'll join us next week on Friday at 6 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time.